Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 4th of March 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson, who is also acting as the technical desk. So, what sort of weather have we got in Plymouth? Well, brilliant blue sky, quite wonderful. The sun is out. It's pretty cold, though. We understand it's pretty chilly in Rhyl, but bright and sunny. London is the same. But unfortunately, British regions 5 and 6, it's cloudy and overcast. And talking of regions leads us nicely into the rising communitarian state in the United Kingdom and what the politicians are up to.
Indeed, shutting down RT. We mentioned this yesterday, but 21st Century Wire has an article on this written by Stuart Hooper. And he's saying that broadcaster RT is facing an inquiry after one viewer, I didn't realise it was that serious, one viewer apparently so deeply offended by the allegedly anti-Western views being broadcast, felt the need to complain to British TV and radio regulator Ofcom. The comments were made on Peter Lavell's popular show Crosstalk and supposedly breached impartiality standards. And Stuart goes on to say Western mainstream media is quick to accuse RT of being Kremlin-backed, but always forgets to mention that the BBC is an entirely British state-funded institution. He says, if accusations of impartiality from RT always stem back to that fact, why is the BBC not facing exactly the same scrutiny? This calls into question the motives and intentions of Ofcom. Its censorship perhaps is a true agenda. Why does the UK government not take the concerns of hundreds of thousands of people seriously? Meanwhile, a single complaint can potentially destroy an entire media outlet. And I think overall his article is pretty close to the money.
Well, I think he's spot on. And of course, it's taken the UK column to expose the dirty work of BBC's charity, BBC Media Action. And if you haven't yet read it, have a look on the UK column website for our article on BBC subversion and particularly relating to what the BBC has been doing to help destabilise countries like Kazakhstan, but also into Syria and Iraq. And of course, we've got BBC Monitoring, previously funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And the job of that organisation was to monitor overseas news broadcasts in order to twist or pervert those broadcasts to the benefit of the British government. So sheer hypocrisy. But I think it shows, Mike, that the British state is getting very, very worried that Russia today is having an impact on news reporting.
Well, I suppose if you're at war with the country, you don't want their national or one of their national television channels right in your speaking to your people directly.
Well, absolutely. And talking of war, we should bring in Florence of Arabia. Of course, Britain's very own chairman of the Defence Select Committee. Here he is, bottom left, in case you haven't seen him. He may look like a Taliban leader, but this is only his dress after he was having a little walkabout in Afghanistan. So here he is, Tory MP Rory Stewart, also known as Florence of Arabia, chairman of the Defence Select Committee, Bilderberger Trilateral Commission, EU Council on Foreign Relations, and he's also heavily involved with a charity called Turquoise Mountain, which I believe is closely connected to Prince Charles. But what has this young whippersnapper been up to? Well, he's ramping up the rhetoric for more defence spending. We mustn't spend less than 2% in order to make sure we keep the pressure on Putin. The article on screen back in 2014. But here he is in 2015. And he's back on the same subject. He's appears to have tidied up his dress a little bit, Mike. He's wearing a tie there. The centre photograph is Rory Stewart on the election, on his campaign trail. So we've got this schoolboy dressed up as a Taliban leader, now advising on what Britain should do with regard to defence. Pretty scary, isn't it?
Indeed. As we know, the rhetoric against Russia keeps building. And yesterday, we have French economist and Russian expert Jacques Sapir, his blog post here covering an analysis of the death of the Russian politician Boris Nemtsov on the 27th, 28th of February. And he points out that the killing has all the hallmarks of a contract killing. He says that the timeline, just to remind everybody, is that it's known that Nemtsov dined with a Ukrainian model at a restaurant, and it sort of comes out onto Red Square. And then what seems to happen is that he and the model left the restaurant on foot, past St. Basil's Cathedral, and took the Grand Bridge that crosses the Moscow River. That someone shot him from behind, killing him. The shooter fired 8 shots, 4 of which hit Nemtsov in the back, and then he jumped into a car. Quite interesting. He says it's quite interesting that this happened when a snowplow conveniently was on the side masking the scene for cameras operating on the bridge, monitoring the traffic. And the weapon appears to have been an automatic pistol of the Makarov type, and he's saying that his companion was not hit. He's saying that from this point, I'll just quote a little bit from here. From this point of view, one wonders why not wait until Nemtsov returned home. The classic type of contract killing occurs in a spot where one is sure to find the victim, the stairwell of an apartment building, or as the victim exits a restaurant. The very choice of crime scene would indicate, because it was just right across from the Kremlin. In fact, he describes it as being right under the windows of the Kremlin. So he says the very choice of crime scene would indicate a demonstrative intention, such as to implicate Putin in the murder. In any case, it's evident that the assassins took risks that seem to indicate a political intention. And he goes on to discredit the notion that this could have been a murder directed by Putin. And he wrote, the media in France and in countries in the West have put forth the idea of a murder commanded by the Kremlin or by movements close to the Kremlin. We will say right now that the first hypothesis is not coherent with the crime scene. Further, it's hard to see what interest the Russian government would have had in having one of the opposition killed. But he goes on. He's basically making the point. It certainly gives the West yet more excuse to ramp up the rhetoric.
Yeah, which is coming on thick and fast at the moment. So we've got 2 things going on in parallel. We've got the undermining of the Constitution, common law and Parliament in UK, keep the public attention on that, get the fear going by everything to do with Muslims and jihadists, and then we've got them ramping up effectively aggression with Russia.
Yeah. And in the meantime then, Sergei Lavrov, he was speaking at a nuclear disarmament conference in Geneva on the 2nd of March, which I suppose was Sunday, where he was making the point that the US still maintains tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. He was saying that Russia has reduced its stockpile of such weapons, transferring them to the category of non-deployed and placing them in central storages within the boundaries of national territory, is what he said, despite the fact that the US nuclear weapons capable of reaching Russian territory are still operationally deployed in Europe. So more complaints from Russia, but in the meantime, they now starting to operate with, they've announced further naval drills with in the Mediterranean with Egypt this time. So all this kind of stuff continues, and it is a build-up of tension, I suppose.
Deliberate build-up of tension, without question.
But don't worry, because Europe is going to face its own September 11th within 2 years, and this is according to Colonel Gaddafi's cousin. And this is Ahmed Gaddafi al-Dam, formerly one of Gaddafi's most trusted security chiefs, and he was speaking, I believe he was in Egypt when he made these comments, and he's basically saying that there are many terrorists among people within Libya and other countries. Islamic State, he's really referring to between 10 and 50 in every 1,000 people, is what he told the Mail. And he's saying that they are traveling throughout Europe. Within 1 year, 2 years, you'll have another September 11th. So I wonder whether, following the death of his cousin, in fact, he's ended up becoming a propaganda mouthpiece for Western governments.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. But this is clearly more of the sort of fear rhetoric at work, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm just keeping an eye on the chat box there. There's some comments on the streaming. We'll just watch that. But I think at the moment we're going to keep going. Obviously, the news today is recorded and will come out.
Okay. So, front page of the Times today, really incredible. Call for national debate on Muslim sex grooming, and this photograph.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yes. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a lot here. I mean, I think what is going into most people's subliminal mind, and I think that's what this front page is about, is that we've got Nick Clegg and Cameron laughing about the whole subject of sex grooming. So Theresa May's looking incredibly serious. They're laughing. So is this two senior politicians laughing that they've been able to distract public attention away from paedophiles in Westminster to blame it all on Asian Muslims? Is that what's going on? Or is this actually the elite laughing at the general public as a whole?
I think it's probably a combination of those things, but really the potential to discredit these two is right there in your face, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's the reality on the streets as far as child abuse goes?
Well, at the weekend, as we were holding our conference in Nottingham, there were hundreds of people out on the streets absolutely complaining about the fact that nothing is being done to deal with this child abuse issue. And what we have here is a short 2-minute clip from that, a discussion with Mickey Summers. Now, we should probably preempt this by warning you that Mickey is wearing
a onesie.
A onesie, yes.
Yeah.
And our point is it's a really sad indictment of this country when somebody has to do that in order to try to draw attention to what has been years of systematic abuse and then the systematic cover-up of that abuse. But
Can I just say, let's remember it's taken Russia today to get its reporters in on the streets to report the stealing of property by corrupt British courts and bailiffs companies, and of course the BBC simply refusing to report the massive amount of information coming to the surface about paedophiles. As Mike says, it's taken Mickey Summers to put on a baby costume to get some form of media coverage.
So let's have a look at that and then we'll comment a bit more in a couple of minutes.
Just hang on. Right, okay. We're ready.
We're doing interviews. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Mickey.
Hi.
We've turned up here today to come and see the protest. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's happening here today?
This is about 6 decades of child abuse in children's homes. It was done by those employed to look after kids. It runs from 1953 and it's probably still happening now. My case, I took to the police in 2003. They failed to investigate. That is under investigation right now by the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and it's been reported through Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. I've had to come all the way from New York to fight this because it's been covered up, and I exposed the cover-up last year. But it got exposed by a lot of people protesting from July of 2013, and the protests have continued. We've got it out in the open now. We're hoping that we're on the verge of getting a survivors-led public inquiry.
Can you tell me what kind of support you've had from the police, social services, everything else like that?
Well, I'll tell you what support I've had from the police. I went to them in 2003. They failed to investigate. While I was in New York, they said they was trying to arrange an interview through Interpol. I spoke to Chief of Police Jim Shepherd in the city of Rochester, New York. No one from Nottingham Police ever contacted them, and it wasn't until December of 2014 that I got my first interview with any UK police officer. I was on Facebook and Twitter battering them non-stop to try and get interviewed. That finally happened when a Mansfield newspaper put on the front page, "Find my rapist before I do," because I'd actually located him. And if the police weren't prepared to go and get him, I told them I'll go and do a citizen's arrest.
So, what Mickey is talking about there is he's calling for a survivor-led inquiry. But of course, what we were trying to do at the weekend is really come at a slightly different angle to solving this problem, because we don't believe that any of these inquiries are going to be, at least inquiries are managed. So even a survivor-led inquiry, it'd be pretty hard to push through necessarily. So we're trying a slightly different approach.
Well, the grand jury, some
Yes.
hitting power is what we need to get out there, is to make individual people responsible instead of accountable, instead of organisations.
So at the weekend, John Hirst was describing the process of running a grand jury, and of course we had Strider, and she was really leading the evidence for one particular grand jury, which was the one on state cover-up of paedophilia, and of course was helped by a number of other witnesses.
Yes.
And what actually happened at the end of that period was that 4 grand juries were actually set up on 4 different subjects, with the aim of deciding whether there's a case to answer for misconduct in public office by on a number of different subjects by people that hold public office, by individuals named that hold. So these were quite specific charges. Now, of course, there hasn't been a grand jury held in this country since the 1930s, and so this was the end of an 80-year sort of hiatus on that. And one of the points that John Hirst was making was that, of course, a grand jury does not have to be initiated by the state. And there's a term for a grand jury which is initiated by a group of individuals. That's called a runaway grand jury. And in fact, of course, it is our responsibility as members of the public, if we are aware that a crime has taken place, to do something about it. And in fact, if we're not getting any help from the state in order to do something about it, it is our responsibility to do something about it ourselves. And that was really the main point of this. So those grand juries, there were 4 grand juries. 3 of them found that there was a case to answer. The 4th didn't find that there was a case to answer. That was not on the basis of the evidence. In fact, that was a procedural issue. And as a result of that procedural issue, they were unable to maintain a quorum of 12, which is required in order to pass a verdict. So what that really demonstrated was that the process works, because where one person was actually uncomfortable with the procedure that particular grand jury was running, he decided that he could not continue with it. Nonetheless, 3 grand juries found that there was a case to answer for 3 charges of misconduct in public office, and John Hirst is proceeding with bringing those charges to the Old Bailey, and we'll see. We'll keep you informed on how that goes. But really. Incredible situation happening at the weekend.
And people took it very seriously, and the conduct of the grand jury was taken very seriously. So a lot of people said there's some real power coming to the surface here with, I know I'm picked up on it occasionally, I'm going to say ordinary people actually saying, no, we've had enough of this, now we're going to take the action to bring individuals to account, not the government, not governmental departments, but let's bring the individual to account, and this is clearly the way to go.
Yeah.
Well, let's remember that today, as we speak, brave Robert Green is appearing again in Aberdeen Sheriff Court. He's due for sentencing today. This is a man trying to speak out about the abuse of children, Holly Gregg in particular. Let's remember he's been imprisoned twice simply for trying to deal with paedophiles. And he's been under what we're calling house arrest for nearly 1 year, i.e. at home, having to report to his local police station every day. This is what the situation is with David Cameron's Conservative government. It isn't the government who's responsible here. David Cameron is the man who's got to take responsibility. But reality of Britain in 2015, speak out on child abuse, and you are the one who's imprisoned. Now, if it was just Robert Green, maybe people could say, well, it's just one case, it can't be right. But of course, the same thing has happened with Melanie Shaw. She, of course, is an abuse victim herself. She's a whistleblower for the some 150 youngsters that were abused at Beechwoods Children's Home in Nottingham. What has the British state done to her? What has David Cameron done to her? What has Theresa May done to her? They've put her in prison, and at the moment we're deeply concerned for the physical safety of Melanie Shaw, as none of the people who were previously corresponding with her have had any communication at all. So no letters and certainly no telephone calls. And perhaps most importantly, it's clear that Melanie Shaw is being blocked from communicating with her lay legal advisor. And yet the state, this comes straight back to Theresa May, has tried to force a solicitor from a law firm that Melanie has previously sacked. They've tried to use that law firm again to represent Melanie Shaw. So abuse victims imprisoned, people who speak out on behalf of the victims imprisoned. And of course, the other favourite trick we'll just remind people of, a number of ladies throughout UK who have spoken out about paedophile rings have been simply branded mentally ill, sectioned and put in psychiatric units. And this is very brave Emma Stoops, who was sectioned in Cornwall last year because she had reported a paedophile ring. Well, who's responsible? People are responsible for what's going on. And let's have a look at the happy couple. Well, this is how they like to show themselves. David and Samantha Cameron. They are such a nice family, clean, upstanding people going to church. Well, what has David Cameron been up to? Well, here's the Independent. Westminster paedophile ring. David Cameron is dismissive of sex abuse allegations, MP Simon Danczuk claims. So here was the Prime Minister saying, oh no paedophiles in Parliament, nothing to see. And we've got another headline from the Independent down here, where Cameron is now pointing the finger at the civil servants, the public sector. If you are responsible for looking after children, you make a mistake, you are going to go to prison. What is all this about? Well, what David Cameron is doing very cynically is, of course, distracting public attention from Elm Guesthouse and paedophiles involved with Westminster and the establishment. He's distracting public attention back onto other areas. So very cold, callous, cynical action by British Prime Minister David Cameron. What sort of man is he? Well, actually, it's taken a Flemish newspaper. This is the Flemish equivalent to the Metro newspaper, and they've produced an amazing article. Let's have a look at it. Some of this mirrors what appeared in the British press some time ago. Effectively, it says elite hooligans in Oxford. Who are they talking about? Well, there we are, ringed. There is a young David Cameron, now British Prime Minister. But this article goes into a lot more detail than was ever printed in the British press. And let's have a look at what they're saying. So basically, the Danish director, Lone Scherfig, is talking about her new film, The Riot Club. The British elite helped me make the film. My producer, Peter Cernin, has a really long title of nobility. He was a flatmate of David Cameron's. I must say, I'm still amazed that he wanted me to make this film. And then she goes on to say, I find it sad that you can be so highly educated and yet not brought up at all as regards responsibility and respect for others. At the Bullingdon Club, a new member had to burn a £50 note in front of a homeless person by way of an initiation rite. So it's absolutely in our faces. We have people now running Britain, cold, callous, dysfunctional, what are we dealing with? Sociopaths?
At the least.
I think something very serious going on here. You taunt a homeless person by burning money in front of them. And we've got people who can't work out why at the moment David Cameron absolutely hammering the poor, the disabled, etc. Well, much of what the government is doing is being done by stealth. But we'd like to thank a viewer in Scotland for pointing out this amazing little cluster of information to do with how the country is being managed. And it starts with this, a report, the economic benefits of eco-mines. Now, we were fascinated by the title because we've been warning about the state attack on people's minds through the behavioural change unit run by the Cabinet Office. But here we've got a case study, and it's looking at the economic benefits of dealing with people with mental illness in a particular way. Here's some of the outcomes of this report. We consider that the potential benefits and avoided costs of the intervention to the state and broader public sector are the following: avoided prescription costs, avoided medical consultation costs, avoided use of psychiatric nurses, avoided benefit payments, avoided disability, and then really positive points here: increased tax receipt to the Exchequer, increased national insurance. So we've got intervention with people who should receive the utmost care and sympathy at the hands of the state. What is this organisation looking at? Well, how can we save the state some money? So where does this come from? Well, we were intrigued to see it linked to the mental health charity Mind. Let's bring them up on screen. This is just a shot from Mind's website. But this is what interested us. If we had a look at what they called our achievements, in 1946 we picked up that they're talking about this, that the National Association of Mental Health was established with 3 major mental health organisations merged. And the one we've highlighted there is the National Council for Mental Hygiene, which was itself established in 1922. Now, all this sounds quite innocuous, but let's have a look about what that National Council for Mental Hygiene was all about. And we better start here. So we've got Colonel J.R. Rees, who at the time was president of the National Council for Mental Hygiene. And we just happen to have had in the UK Column archives his original document from 1940, where he is talking about mental health. And we're just going to give you a few extracts from this document. This is the opening paragraph. It would be hard to imagine a time more unusual or more trying than the present for a discussion on this. I believe that some people feel that societies giving time and attention to subjects like the present one in war are somehow fiddling like Nero, but I have no sympathy with that point of view. Just now, at this time, we should, more than ever, be thinking out where we stand and making plans for winning the war and for establishing work for mental health firmly for the future. Now, some very interesting questions. Who was the we? They're very confident in 1940 the war's going to be run. Let's have a look about what this document was really saying. Now, it is available. We did put up the address. You can get it through cpexposed.com, but we will make it available hopefully through the UK Column website. Let's have a look at the detail here. So in this particular one, they are saying that in order to get their view of mental health, mental hygiene out, they are going to infiltrate social organisations. And it says, especially since the last war, we've done much to infiltrate the various social organisations throughout the country and in their work and in their point of view. So here's the infiltration. They then say they're going to attack the professions. And it says the 2 easiest are the teaching profession and the church. The 2 most difficult are law and medicine. So we've got individuals associated with the mental health drive talking about infiltrating the professions in order to skew their views. It says we are to infiltrate the professional and social activities of other people. And the Colonel says, I think we must imitate the totalitarians and organise some kind of 5th column. That's the language of Julia Middleton of Common Purpose. And at the bottom, they even go on to say that they're going to use a long-term plan of propaganda. Is this real? Well, it is, because this man eventually headed up mental health for, he became president of the World Federation of Mental Health in 1948. And of course, that was integrated into the United Nations. But here is the stealth in this block of text here. It says we need to get writing letters to the BBC and the press, but we shouldn't mention this council. Don't let us mention mental hygiene, though we can safely write in terms of mental health and common sense. So the deceit is there. Don't talk about mental hygiene. Let us deceive the public and talk about mental health. So we're going to look into this in more detail, but it appears to us there's something very, very devious going on here with a focus around people supposedly dealing with mental health.
Yes. Right, look, before we just move on to the next subject, I just want to say something about the live stream. There's clearly a problem with the live stream at the moment. People are going to be able to watch this on the archive later on and at 9 p.m. tonight. But there's a bit of criticism in the chat box that we aren't doing anything to solve this problem.
Right.
And basically, just what I want to say is we are a man down today because Nick has had to go and do a message. So I am operating the system from the news desk and presenting at the same time. And under those circumstances, I'm not able to just stop and go round the back and see what the problem is. So we just have to keep going, do the programme, get it out as quickly as possible. And I'm sorry that you haven't been able to watch it live at 1 p.m, but you will be able to see it at 9 p.m, and it'll also be on the website as usual.
I'd just also like to remind viewers, because I think there's one or two think we have studios equivalent to the BBC. Our budget is a tad less than 3.65 billion, which is what the BBC is running on. So stay with us and keep a sense of humour, because at the end of the day, that makes UK column news fun.
Yes. Okay. Well, some people have had a sense of humour failure, and this is one of them. So this is Mr. Ganesh, who is writing in the FT today saying, "Disunited Kingdom, London in a world of its own." He's saying, in the original version of the film Alfie, released in 1966, you see Michael Caine ambling through the back streets of King's Cross. The setting is all urban desolation, a London that is not swinging. In 1987, 31 people died in a blaze at the rickety train station nearby. Wooden escalators creaking their way over flammable grease and litter allowed the fire to spread with hideous alacrity. A decade after that, Tony Blair told an interviewer of the shame he felt when he drove his children through King's Cross, a place synonymous in 1997 with homelessness and prostitution. It is now a feat of persuasion to convince a Londoner born in that year that this part of town was world famously squalid. And he's going on to say that globalization is what has brought about this great regeneration, and that London is a symbol of the fact that other cities in Britain have not similarly embraced the globalist common purpose. He doesn't use the term common purpose, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he's saying. But he ends the piece by saying, London has become not just concrete and steel, but a reification of an idea, globalization. So this is really a very pro-constitutional reform, let's divide the country into regions. And as we've mentioned many times before, of course, in the European plan, London is to be its own city-state region.
Yeah.
And of course, they want to devolve that sort of model out to other places. But this article, in parallel with that on the Telegraph, really grabbed my attention. This is from Michael Fabricant, Tory party MP, of course, MP for Lichfield in Staffordshire. And he's saying that John Bercow, the Commons Speaker, this week warned that the Palace of Westminster is crumbling away and might have to be abandoned, either temporarily or permanently. The price tag for repairs could be as much as £3 billion. Some people might know, especially since the screening of Michael Cockerell's Inside the Commons documentary, that I don't always agree with Mr. Bercow, but on this occasion I do, and of course that's Fabricant saying that. If we continue to use the Palace of Westminster, that incredible, iconic, fragile, faux Gothic building, because it is so fragile, it's only stood for hundreds of years, he goes on to say, you just can't simply carry out repairs piecemeal. The bill to the public purse will be almost double over the prolonged period of years. Is that seriously more palatable? No, we must find a temporary home elsewhere, and he's suggesting Lichfield, his own constituency, is the best place to host Parliament for a while. And he says, when it eventually returns to the Palace of Westminster, the cathedral can then play host to a devolved and permanent English Parliament. So there you go. Michael Fabricant joins the list of people that I spoke about at the weekend that are pushing the constitutional reform agenda, the regionalisation of this country, which is the European agenda.
And is the reset as well.
Absolutely. And ultimately the United Nations agenda.
Yeah.
So, absolutely.
Treason by stealth, treason quietly spoken, as we said on the last UK column front page. But this is the fifth column now, actively working to destroy the very machinery of Westminster.
Indeed. Now, I just want to highlight this article, which was actually posted yesterday, and it's by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. He sent it to us over the weekend. Amid media blackout, Canada lawsuit challenges banker rules. Some people may have seen this before the court hearing. It was on Global Research and other places. But basically, Bill Still was covering this a couple of days ago and pointing out that, of course, the Canadian Central Bank between 1937 and 1938 and 1977, famous for basically having a Bradbury Pound type policy where they were issuing interest-free money in the form of loans to businesses and so on. And what basically Bill's still pointing out here, that the St. Lawrence Seaway development, the national pension system, airports, subways, and other projects deemed to be in the public interest sprouted in the rich soils of interest-free finance between 38 and 74. Basically this is coming out of the work of a monetary reform organisation in Canada called COMER, which is the Committee for Monetary and Economic Reform. And they took the situation to court with the aim of returning the Canadian Central Bank to this method of issuing interest-free money in this way. Now, the Canadian government has until apparently the end of March to appeal this decision, and after that it then goes to full trial. So this is an interesting development. We're going to keep an eye on that one. Well, I just wanted to highlight this report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Living Standards, Recent Trends and Future Challenges. And this has been in a number of the mainstream press outlets today. They're saying that millions of workers are still earning less than before the 2008 financial crash. Although if you look at the BBC coverage, well, in fact, the BBC coverage of this is pretty similar to the British government's coverage of it. They're really saying it's a real success because living standards are back to 2008 levels. But in fact, they collapsed following the 2008 crash. So you know, they haven't actually recovered. What has actually happened is that for some groups, the average incomes are back to pre-2008 levels. But for many others, they are not. For example, 31 to 59-year-olds are still 2.5% lower. For 22 to 30-year-olds are still 7.6% lower than 2007, 2008. So for the government or the BBC to suggest that everything's back to normal is a bit disingenuous. Paul Johnson, who's the IFS director, told the BBC Today programme, the most remarkable thing is less that incomes fell. Incomes always fall during and after recessions. The thing that's really different this time is what happened in the 1980s and 1990s, is they've taken an awfully long time to recover. It's astonishing that 7 years later, incomes are no higher than they were pre-recession, and indeed in working age households they're still quite a bit below they were pre-recession. So the government, of course, suggesting that this Institute for Fiscal Studies report is absolutely supporting their economic disaster, their long-term economic disaster. In fact, when you read a bit further down past the headlines, you find that that's not quite the case.
Well, I should press the magic button. Okay. There we go.
Okay. So the financial press over the weekend then talking about this situation. So this is the liquidation and default of 9 billion euros of debt of a bad bank in Austria. Now this is the Hypo Alpe Adria bank failure, and that of course was split into a good bank and a bad bank. The bad bank is known as Heta Bank, and these debts, this bad paper, as it's known, was guaranteed by the governments of Austria and also the province of Carinthia. So what basically happened was that the Austrian government refused to extend any guarantee on any new losses on this bad bank. So effectively what the government did was to default on that. And they are then calling on a bail-in, or they're causing a bail-in to take place. But what's really staggering about the bail-in in this case is that it will be senior creditors. This is the first time that senior creditors, so-called senior creditors, are being affected by such a bail-in. Now, what's a senior creditor? Well, the FT's definition is that when a business goes bankrupt, the creditor who will be paid would be paid before junior creditors, or will get a larger percentage of what they're owed. So basically, the people that are first in line to take advantage of a bankruptcy situation are usually the last in line to be called on to bail in a bank. But in this case, for the first time, they are required to bail in a bank, and that is a pretty major development.
Yeah.
So
interesting things beginning to unfold. We just need people to keep pushing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, George Osborne, go back to him for a second. He's continuing to dodge questions over the HSBC, as is David Cameron. But he says that HSBC is a very important bank.
Okay.
Very important bank. I'm sure it is a very important bank. It's certainly a very important bank for the financial system. and for any drugs cartels that happen to be using its services. But anyway,
or individuals.
Well, indeed.
Yeah.
But he was speaking on Radio 4 this morning, and he was asked on Radio 4 whether he had anything to say about, or whether he had spoken to Stephen Green, who is the bank's former boss, regarding tax evasion, and he basically avoided the question. He said, the information that's been published recently has only recently come to light. Until this point, the allegations had been that individuals with bank accounts at HSBC had been evading tax, and that HMRC was rightly investigating it. The new investigation is that potentially the allegation is that HSBC Suisse colluded in this. This is new information. So he's a bit sad, I think. But although he does look particularly sociopathic in that photograph.
I don't know. I think his nose is growing a bit there, actually. I think his nose is a bit longer than it used to be.
Yeah.
But never mind, he can have a night out and relax in the club. Now, as we see this massive attack on Britain's constitution, common law, and all the pillars, really, of our society, this is deliberate, it's real, it's happening. I think what we need is to be able to call on some very strong leadership at the 2015 general elections. So let's remind ourselves of the sort of people that are coming forward from the Tory party. Well, here you are, Mr. Brooks Newmark, in his birthday suit, I think it's called. And he's got colleagues, of course, Chris Bryant, MP, not quite in his birthday suit, but probably just as well in that photograph. But really, we just wanted to say, relax, general public, everything's okay. You're going to be safe with us, well, those two people. And this is the real message. We think, UK column, get out there and vote Conservative 2015. Or if that's not to your liking, don't be shy, vote Labour, because these are the people who are going to measure the country. And of course, a special election message for David Cameron from the UK column. We are right behind you. And here we are, strong leadership, a clear economic plan, a better, more secure future. So message from us at the UK column, don't hesitate. If you want to see the country completely destroyed, be sure to vote Conservative 2015. So that's a lovely picture, isn't it? That they're all focused on the little man in his bathroom.
And when you said we were right behind David Cameron, was that in the sense of Nemtsov?
I can neither confirm nor deny that, Mike. So who do we think is going to win the Rainbow Coalition in May 2015?
Well, everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Well, UK column front page. If you haven't seen it, we invite you to have a look. This is the first edition of the UK column under its new state licence. We're pleased to say that we've now got a Category 3 political and social reporting licence. And, of course, that requires us to carry a front page with the latest government's announcements. And what are we going to show viewers here?
Well, really, we want to highlight this, that Nick Clegg is the new Prime Minister-President of the UK. And of course, this fits in with Graham Allen MP, who runs the Constitutional Reform Committee in Parliament, who is calling for an elected President, Prime Minister, President, something along those lines. Well, we know that after the general election, there's going to be further negotiation over who's going to form a coalition. And you know, the suggestion is that Nick Clegg could be the interim Prime Minister President while that's all going on.
Yeah, and he was trained by Leon Britton, I think, in European and how to do politics in a European European fashion. So ideal. Leon Britton trains up Nick Clegg, and Nick Clegg, of course, has been doing a huge amount to tackle paedophiles in UK. Well, don't just sit, get out and do. And we just like to say well done to all of the people who are helping Response at the moment. People getting out and doing what's needed on the streets. And of course, in a sensible, common sense, peaceful way. So here's one of the advert banners for Response that was at the conference. And we're delighted to say, come on, get out there and let's get going. Let's get this country back onto morality, common sense and compassion for our fellow men. If you're listening from overseas, we've done this before, but we'd like to apologise for the behaviour of the British governments. Doesn't matter whether they're Labour, Lib Dem or Conservative. We understand we've now got a criminal cabal effectively running the country, and of course people overseas suffering as a result. If we want to get real change, then people need to influence the general election, and our view is we need proper independent candidates to take the seats, or at least people who are maybe in smaller parties not associated with the mainstream parties.
Now, normally at this point might say what's happening next, but of course nobody can see this on the live stream at the moment, so can't do that. But Ian Puddick, his presentation from the conference is immediately following this news, and will be immediately following the repeat at 9 p.m. tonight as well. So you'll get to see it then, at least.
Okay.
Apologies for the problems today. Hopefully everything will be back to normal tomorrow.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.